This Saturday at noon Eastern Time, 11 a.m. local time in the Central Time Zone, the Washington Huskies travel to Kinnick Stadium to take on the Iowa Hawkeyes in a classic Big Ten Conference matchup. Of course, being said with much sarcasm, and I do find it weird, honestly very strange, that Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt are calling this game. It's very atypical. Over the previous several seasons, they've typically called Michigan or Ohio State games every weekend. Here, there is a big change of pace. They're calling a Washington versus Iowa game that is a conference matchup. And I welcome the change, and it's going to be, I think, a good game, but just because something is good doesn't mean that it is not weird. And just because something weird is weird doesn't mean that it's not bad. I hope what I'm saying makes sense and I'm not just rambling here. But the point I'm trying to make is that this is a different type of game than what we are used to. It feels almost stranger than USC and Penn State playing each other. That feels like a fitting Rose Bowl classic matchup, even though it's taking place in the Coliseum. Do you know the last time that Iowa and Washington met? It was before many of us were born. And I say us because I know for a fact it was before I was born. 1995. 1995. The 1995 Sun Bowl, specifically, was the last time these two teams faced off. Iowa won 38-18. Hayden Fry was Iowa's head coach. Jim Lambright was Washington's head coach. The MVPs of this game were Cedric Shaw for Iowa. Defensively, it was Jared DeVries for Iowa, and Brian Hurley, their punter, was the special teams MVP. And the referee of the game, Bud Alexander, was from the Southwest Conference, which became defunct after the 1996 season, which again was before I was born. So a lot has changed in college football, both for these teams and also on the national stage since the last time they met. What I will tell you here is that both of these coaching staffs are very efficient at squeezing talent and squeezing high execution out of their rosters. They have excellent schemers. I'd say actually on both sides of the football. You got Steve Belichick as the DC for Washington, Phil Parker, the legend, defensive coordinator for Iowa. Tim Lester, I think, has done a very good job with the limited talent pool he's had on Iowa's offense of developing good game plans. What they did against Ohio State, for example, utilizing that short passing game, I think was very intelligent because Iowa, well, they don't have many receivers to attack you deep, but also Ohio State is strong on the defensive line, and their corners and safeties typically play off man. They don't play tight with opposing wide receivers because of their conservative scheme. So Lester took advantage of that. And as for Jed Fish and Brennan Carroll with Washington's offense, they have made Will Rogers into something that I don't know if he has been before. It's like they have unlocked a part of him, and perhaps part of it's due to age, that Mike Leach didn't at Mississippi State. Will Rogers has only thrown one interception, one, in 6 games, and has about a 170 passer rating. So these staffs are very good. This is a must-win game for both teams if they want to have a shot to have respectable postseason play, whether that is the college football playoff or whether that is reaching a bowl game that may have some meaning, despite the fact that the college football playoff has essentially further eroded interest in non-college football playoff games. But enough rambling from me. Welcome back, everyone. Before we preview this game and I give my prediction, and I've already previewed a part of it, but really get into the specific details, I want you to help the channel out and subscribe to the channel, like the video, hit the notification bell, comment your thoughts, your preview and prediction for this game down below. Just comment the score prediction if that's all you want to do, and then the name of the team who you think is going to win. Share this video around so that we can gain more viewers, so that we can gain more subscribers, so that more college football fanatics can be a part of the best Big Ten football channel on YouTube. And also join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. That way, you have a community where we can talk college football 24/7, even when I am not active on YouTube or record, like doing anything relating to the channel. You can be in the Discord server with me, and also support our channel via the Patreon page or merchandise store via the links in the description or down below in the pinned comment if you want to. But the biggest things you can do to help the channel out are all free: liking, subscribing, hitting the bell, commenting, sharing the video, and joining the Discord server. Thank you very much. Iowa is a 2.5-point favorite in this game, and these teams are viewed as pretty even, pretty equal in power ratings. By even and equal, I do not mean that they are the same style of team. That could not be further from the truth. Iowa is all defense and special teams, though they've regressed a little bit on defense and special teams this year compared to last year, and they're a little bit better offensively, but still not great offensively. They're just now bad/below average instead of trash and terrible like they were the previous 2 to 3 years. Washington is more offensively focused than defensively. They are more balanced than Iowa, though. Washington's offense and defense are closer together than Iowa's, which are still seemingly worlds apart, although maybe a world or two closer, again, than they were in previous years. Iowa being favored by 2.5 is where the line opened up. It stayed right there. Both teams have one conference loss, 2 losses overall. They lost to their in-state rivals, Iowa to Iowa State and Washington to Washington State, in really painful fashion. And if some better decisions were made in both of those games, well, the Huskies and the Hawkeyes could only have one loss entering this matchup, and maybe it'd be a top 25 matchup. Washington right now, they could be 6-0. They could be. They should have beaten Rutgers statistically, and Washington State, while not as lopsided of performance in terms of final score versus statistics, was a game that Washington also had in hand, and it got away from them, and credit to their opponents for beating them. They're viewed as 9 points better than the average college football team per FPI, 15 points better than the average college football team per S&P+. Iowa is viewed as 9.3 points better than the average college football team in FPI, and 12.1 points better than the average college football team in S&P+. I think the fact that Iowa played an Ohio State team, who after that performance I have tabbed as certainly a top 2 team nationally and the best team in the Big Ten, I think that impresses upon us, most of us, a negative viewpoint, a negative bias against Iowa. I do think that they are better than a lot of power ratings are saying they are right now, but power ratings aren't speculative. They only go off of information that they have. I am being a little bit speculative there, so take from that what you will. And I'd say Washington actually may be a teeny bit overrated. I say teeny bit because they're viewed as a top 30, in some cases top 25 or top 20 team by these power ratings. And I don't know if they are, because as I've said on Twitter, as I said about Michigan in my reaction to their loss to Washington, Michigan is not really good. Rutgers has limitations. Washington State is not good. And then Weber State, Eastern Michigan, and Northwestern, 3 of 4 of Washington's victories, well, those teams aren't any good either. So Iowa has played the tougher schedule. S&P Plus and FPI try to do their best to take that into account, but they've come out with different results. Iowa, you give 3 points to them just on a home field advantage basis. That's what Vegas says the average home field advantage is worth in points. I'd probably bump up Iowa's, if I got to be honest, to 4 or maybe 5. It is a very intimidating environment, and really only the top teams can go into Kinnick Stadium and typically come out with a victory because of how intimidating of a place it is. So let's add 3 points for the sake of argument, or even 4 or 5. And Iowa should be favored by about 3, 3.5, or 4, 4.5, maybe 5 per FPI. And maybe even more than that because of the distance traveled. Washington, remember, is traveling, well, they're traveling 2 time zones to Iowa. And then you look at S&P Plus, and it should be really a pick'em that probably leans Iowa just a tad, or maybe a half point or a point, point and a half, 2.5 points, 2 points in favor of the Hawkeyes. So Iowa should be a favorite in this game, just looking at things from the broad view, looking at the forest. We'll get into the trees and the details later like we always do. And you look at the points per play margin, and points per play is a good way, also points per play margin or anything to do with points per play, of looking at how dominant a team is on either side of the ball or overall without factoring in strength of schedule. Because sometimes strength of schedule is a self-fulfilling prophecy, especially this early in the year when most of the top matchups have yet to be played. We've really seen, well, what we thought was a top matchup in Texas-Michigan. Clearly Texas is an elite team. Michigan is not. Alabama-Georgia, top matchup. And outside of that, maybe Clemson, Georgia, but Clemson has not played anyone who is worth anything outside of the Bulldogs. And they got steamrolled by the Bulldogs. So there's a lot more matchups to come. But Washington on an average basis scores 0.11 more points per play than their opponent does per play. That's what points per play margin is how much more or less do you score per play than your opponent, your average opponent faced, scores per play. For Iowa, they're barely in the negatives, but right about as close to that dead even point as you can get. That's because Ohio State completely dominated them in a way that Iowa has not dominated any other team throughout the season. You look at strength of schedule. Iowa is 9th in strength of schedule, 24th in game control. Washington is 83rd in strength of schedule and 53rd in game control. Iowa, in all of their games, controlled their opponent for at least a half of football, if not more. For Washington, I can't say that. I can't. They did not control Washington State. They didn't control Michigan. They didn't control Rutgers in all three of those games. And Northwestern, that performance against a Northwestern team who probably will go 0-9 in conference was pretty bad. That was a pretty bad performance against Northwestern. So that's why you have those numbers there. Washington has been a team that has really shot themselves in the foot throughout the year, whether it is on missed field goals, whether it is on turnovers, not executing or finishing in the red zone. Iowa doesn't shoot themselves in the foot as much. Yes, they had several turnovers against Ohio State, but Ohio State right now is top 5 in defensive and offensive efficiency. They're number 1 in points allowed per game on defense, and they're number 1 in points per play margin by a mile. I mean, even when you factor in strength of schedule, which Ohio State's is weak, their points per play margin numbers are very impressive and indicative of the fact that they are probably an elite team, even though no one has really tested them yet. So just some things to keep in mind. I think the critical matchup here is Washington's passing offense versus Iowa's defense. That is what I think the critical matchup is here. Washington, right now, on the season, has a quarterback who is in the top half of the Big Ten easily in production and has a 171.4 passer rating. Will Rogers is completing 73.6% of his passes. He's 1,625 passing yards, 12 touchdowns, only 1 interception. He's been sacked 9 times. He's averaging 9.1 yards per pass attempt with a long of 51. He has a receiver in Denzel Boston who has 492 receiving yards and 8 receiving touchdowns. Giles Jackson has 479 receiving yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. And Jeremiah Hunter has a receiving touchdown, 222 receiving yards. He transferred in from Cal in the 2024 preseason. This is a lethal passing offense. And also Kaliki Latu, Decker DeGraff, Jonah Coleman. These are other players who have over 100 receiving yards in this offense. The running backs and tight ends do get involved. It's a very creative offense, a very efficient offense. And it is that specifically through the air, where Washington is 196 pass attempts to 197 rush attempts, 9.2 yards per pass attempt, about 5 yards per carry. All 5 rushing touchdowns go to running back Jonah Coleman, who has 601 rushing yards and averages 6.7 yards per carry. This is a good offense, but specifically, in the pass attack, where they have Denzel Boston, Giles Jackson, Jeremiah Hunter, good set of tight ends. The running backs are involved in the passing game, and whether it's Will Rogers or DeMond Williams, the true freshman who gets involved in things and is used not just as their wildcat quarterback, but also is given some pretty nice passing looks and has a good arm, definitely the future of the program there under Jedd Fisch. They will find ways to exploit your pass defense and to get their receivers open, to drive in between the 20s, really with their passing attack, and then keep you honest in the ground. Iowa so far this year has done a better job stopping the run than stopping the pass. The Ohio State game, I think, for the most part, was an exception to that rule. Ohio State, I think, did a better job on the ground than through the air against Iowa. Just eventually, Iowa's defense broke because Ohio State has elite receivers. The run game was killing them, allowing Ohio State to drive always into Iowa territory. And Iowa couldn't produce anything offensively. But it has been a theme this season where Iowa up front has done a pretty respectable job of stopping opposing rushing attacks, again, outside of Ohio State, but they have given up some big passing plays. I think that they're getting better in that area. They only allowed 1, 2, maybe 3 to Ohio State, and they have the best receiver core in America. Like, if you don't have an offense, or if your offense is bad like Iowa's is, you're eventually going to give up big plays, no matter how good your defense is, because they're going to get tired, and an offensive coordinator like Chip Kelly is going to find little areas of weakness, weak links to break. And I think that Jedd Fisch and Brennan Carroll and Will Rogers and Denzel Boston and these players can potentially do that. And they'll need to if they want to win. Because Iowa's rushing offense, I think that only a defense like Ohio State or Penn State can stop the Iowa rushing attack. It is a great rushing attack. Ohio State was able to hold it in check because they were willing to constantly commit pressure and stack the box, and sometimes do even more than that. And that's why Tim Lester, to his credit, well, he moved to the passing game, the short passing game, and was able to convert at times reliably on third down against the Buckeyes. But can Washington's passing offense move this Iowa defense? That's a big question. And it's a question that we're certainly going to see on Saturday, and that is going to be the thing that I'm going to be paying attention to, and I think that you should as well. Iowa this season, on defense, the Hawkeyes, they have 6 interceptions, 19 passes defended, 5 forced fumbles, 3 fumble recoveries, and 11 sacks. They earned an interception on Will Howard. They forced a fumble from Jeremiah Smith, who is, well, he's a freshman, so you're going to have some of those moments, but I don't know if that was a freshman moment from Jeremiah Smith. It may have just been an elite play by Jay Higgins, and since Jeremiah Smith is elite, I'm trending toward the latter, that Jay Higgins just made an amazing play right there. This defense will force turnovers. They will stop you in your tracks. You make a mistake, and Washington has been prone to making mistakes this season, and, well, the Iowa Hawkeyes, they'll stop you in your tracks right there. So this is the matchup to pay attention to. Iowa's defense, their pass defense more specifically, pass rush, and their play in defending passes, trying to get interceptions and playing tight coverage against Washington's wide receiver core, their speed, their scheme, and Will Rogers' arm, both his accuracy and arm strength, especially with the deep pass. And when I look at these offenses more specifically, I like Washington at quarterback. I like them even more at wide receiver. I love Iowa at running back here, although Jonah Coleman's done a very good job, so those positions are closer than you think. I like Iowa at tight end, and I really like Iowa on the offensive line. They did get pushed around by Ohio State, but I think a huge part of that, again, was the fact that Iowa would typically block with the standard 5 or 6, and Ohio State in the box would have 7, sometimes 8 players. And Jim Knowles, I think, called a very good game defensively. You look at these tight ends for Iowa, and I mentioned this in my preview for the Ohio State Iowa game, they do a very good job of blocking downfield and of getting to the second level and beyond. And that is part of the reason why Caleb Johnson has been so able to get some of the big plays that he has. He even got a big play in garbage time against the Ohio State Buckeyes, where he did have a long touchdown run, which is not really surprising. I thought he would have done more against the Buckeyes than he ended up doing. But again, credit to Jim Knowles, credit to that Ohio State defense. Caleb Johnson on the season is 771 rushing yards, 10 rushing touchdowns. He's averaging 7.9 yards per carry on 97 carries. And Iowa's only played 5 games. So there's a very good chance Caleb Johnson finishes the season with 1,500 rushing yards, because outside of Nebraska, there aren't many defenses in the remainder of Iowa's schedule, a schedule that is very weak, that will hold Caleb Johnson back. I mean, they play Washington this weekend, at Michigan State the following weekend, host Northwestern the following weekend, host Wisconsin the following weekend, play at UCLA the following Friday. They get a bye, play at Maryland the Saturday after the bye, and then they host Nebraska in a night game on Friday, November 29th, on Black Friday. So I do believe that what Caleb Johnson is doing is sustainable. I just think that Ohio State had an elite defense, and that's why they were able to shut him down. Excuse me. But these offenses are... They really couldn't be different in a lot of ways. Iowa wants to control the clock. They want to run the ball. They're even willing to run it on third and medium, third and long, because they know that Caleb Johnson is better at creating explosive plays than their passing offenses. That's not what Washington or who Washington is. Washington does want to utilize Jonah Coleman, not just in the ground game, though, in the pass game. And Will Rogers and their receivers are the main way that they will try to score points and get into the end zone. Again, Washington has passed for 1,796 yards. They're averaging 12.4 yards per reception, and they have 13 receiving touchdowns. Compare this to Iowa. Iowa is averaging 8.8 yards per reception, and they only have 4 receiving touchdowns compared to 12 of their rushing touchdowns. So these offenses stylistically are different in a variety of ways. I would ultimately go with Washington's here, but Iowa's offense is better than it has been in previous years. It just is. And that is thanks to Tim Lester. That is thanks to the amount of returning production that they've had, for Caleb Johnson being healthy. Last year, he was not exactly healthy. In 2022, he, as a true freshman, was averaging over 4 yards per carry on a team that struggled to run the football to save their life. And I know that last year against Illinois, he had an explosive run. I think he got healthier toward the end of the year. All of Iowa's offensive line returned entering this season, and that is how you get the fact that Iowa is actually top 20 in third quarter points per game on offense. And they're 52nd and fourth quarter points per game. Like, they are a second half team typically on offense. This is what the Illinois State game showed. That's what Troy showed. That is what Minnesota showed. Not Ohio State or not Iowa, not in their 2 losses. So maybe that will be a tell as well. Iowa is top 100 in yards per game. They're top 90 in yards per play. They average 5.2 yards per play. They are top 50 in third down conversion percentage. I mean, these are numbers that last season would be unthinkable for Iowa. And if Iowa had this offense with the defense and special teams they had last year with Cooper DeJean, they probably go 11-1 and don't lose to Minnesota and maybe make that Penn State game a little bit more interesting. Iowa's averaging 5.7 yards per carry and 219 rushing yards per game. And those numbers are not adjusted for sacks. I think sack yardage should be a different statistic in and of itself. Iowa's probably averaging closer to 6 yards per carry when you take out Cade McNamara and all the sacks that he's taken, because he doesn't contribute all that much to the ground game whatsoever. Washington, meanwhile, on the ground, they're averaging 4.9 yards per carry on 158.4 rushing yards per game, When it comes to passing the ball, Washington completes 74.39% of their throws. That is second nationally. And they average 9.3 yards per pass attempt, 12.4 yards per completion. So on a per completion basis, they are not all that impressive, but they take the yards that they can get, and Will Rogers has been very accurate and efficient this year, particularly in between the 20s. It would not shock me at all if this Washington offense could drive up and down in between the 20s on Iowa's defense, not easily, but make it look easier than most ex-Big Ten West schools would view it. For example, I don't know if Nebraska's offense or Minnesota's offense or Wisconsin or Illinois or Northwestern or Purdue could do to Iowa's defense what this Washington offense may be able to do. But I think that Iowa is better on defense in every way compared to the Huskies. Iowa has All-American linebackers. They have an All-American corner in Jermari Harris. They have Sebastian Castro, longtime veteran of the program, who is really tough, who knows how to make plays on the ball, both in the air and on the ground. I really like Iowa's defense. It has taken a step back from last year, which is somewhat disappointing because they returned almost everybody outside of Cooper DeJean. A part of it, though, may be the fact that they are playing better offenses than they had at any point last year. For example, Iowa State has a far superior offense compared to what they had last year. And Ohio State, they have a better offense than I would say anyone Iowa played last year had. Certainly better than Penn State's in 2023. Michigan's offense in 2023 was very underrated. I think it was a near elite to elite offense, but they didn't play all that well against Iowa. Clearly didn't play their A-plus game. One of their worst offensive performances of the season, just by how the offensive line looked. And Ohio State, they looked phenomenal on the offensive line against Iowa this season. So some of that statistical regression is due to tougher competition, honestly, but you can also see in some of the games they've had against lower level competition that they have taken a little bit of a step back on defense. But nonetheless, 11 sacks, 6 interceptions, 5 forced fumbles, and 3 fumble recoveries. They're doing a much better job at forcing turnovers than they did last year. So they're giving their offense, which has had major upgrades, more drives and opportunities to succeed. You look at Iowa's defense right now, and they're still very successful. In total defense, Washington actually allows fewer yards per game, 256.6, compared to Iowa's 328.5. What I will say is that Ohio State and Iowa State have superior offenses compared to anyone who Washington has played. Iowa only allows 60 plays per game. They only allow 15 first downs per game. They only allow 0.8 opponent fourth downs per game. Or like fourth downs as in the opponent goes for it. Teams are much more confident being aggressive against Washington's defense than Iowa's. Much more confident. And what Iowa did on 4th and 2 against Ohio State when Will Howard tried to take it up the middle and Iowa's D-line actually won the battle at the point of attack one of the few times on that day that they did, that was impressive. That shows how strong Iowa's defense can be. And right now they're only allowing opponents to run for 98.8 yards per game. That's factoring in that they've played Ohio State, one of the most productive rushing offenses in America. In passing defense, they are not that good right now statistically. But I think as the year goes on, they will regress to their mean. They will. They'll come back because, again, they just played Ohio State, who was a really good passing offense. Iowa State has a really good passing offense. They played them. Washington's played Rutgers. They have played Michigan and Northwestern. All three of their Big Ten opponents don't have all that special of passing attacks. They just don't. But Washington is impressive in passing defense. They are top 10 in average team passer rating, passing first downs per game, passing yards per game, opponent completion percentage, and opponent completions per game. However, I still think Iowa is better at every position compared to Washington because of their defensive coordinator, because of the players that they brought back, the fact that Iowa's played a much tougher strength of schedule, specifically against opponents who are very strong on the offensive side of the ball in Iowa State, elite at everything, like Ohio State. And I think that while Steve Belichick has done a really good job, there are still holes in Washington's defense, particularly up front, that I don't think Iowa has. I just don't. I would take Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson, and on the D-line, Deontay Craig, Aaron Graves, Yaya Black, and Ethan Hurkett, and guys like Sebastian Castro, Xavier Nwampka, Jermari Harris, Quinn Schulte, TJ Hall, over Alfonso Tupatala, Carson Bruner, Ephesians Prysock, Cameron Febukulanen, Cameron Broussard, Thaddeus Dixon, Jordan Shaw, Void Tunufi, Sebastian Valdez, Jacob Bandes, and Isaiah Ward. Washington's defense is underrated. Don't overlook it. But I do think Iowa's is better. And I think Iowa's also better at special teams. They're just more reliable at making field goals. Overall, of a good punter and returner. And they have a better O-line and a better D-line than the Huskies have. So no further comments there. And as for coaching, I would actually give it to Jedd Fisch. I think Jedd Fisch is a better head coach than Kirk Ferentz is right now. More forward-thinking, more balanced. He's in year one, mind you. And Kirk Ferentz is in over 20 years in his tenure at Iowa. Kirk Ferentz is Iowa, and Iowa is Kirk Ferentz as it stands right now. Right now, Jedd Fisch is in year one at Washington, and he may have a better team than Kirk Ferentz does at Iowa, despite returning less than a fifth of the production that Iowa brought back, or less than half at least, and certainly fewer starters, and he had to be more transfer portal dependent. I also think that Washington's better, no duh, on the offensive side of the football. I think that Iowa has the strength and conditioning edge and also the defensive coaching edge, though, with Phil Parker being the number one defensive coordinator in all of college football. My prediction for this game is I think that Iowa covers, and I think they win. I think it's going to be 27-13. It'll be a close game up until the end where Caleb Johnson will break a long run. The game will be closer than the score indicates, I believe. So the Hawkeyes will cover that 2.5 point spread. They'll win 27-13. Look, it is a trap game for Washington. The reason I say that, and maybe it shouldn't exactly be phrased that way, you're coming off of, from what is from your perspective, a massive win over Michigan. Washington has done a worse job on the road compared to being at home. They're traveling multiple time zones away. Also, factor this in. It is a 9 a.m. Pacific time kickoff for Washington, 11 a.m. for Iowa, but Iowa is more used to playing at this time than Washington is. And the fact that there's probably a lot of the emotions from that Michigan win, and the fact that I think Iowa is better than Michigan. In fact, I perhaps would say significantly better. I think Iowa is a better defense and a better offense. And if everything's going right, potentially a better special teams unit than Michigan does. And it's on the road in a hostile environment. Washington is not Ohio State, and they're not Michigan or Penn State when they're playing well, and that does not bode well for teams entering Kinnick Stadium. That is anecdotal, but I think I've laid the groundwork for you all here that Iowa being favored in winning this game can be argued for with a lot of hard facts and evidence, and not just anecdotal and what ifs and when it's a full moon, like all of that type of ridiculous stuff. I think Iowa wins. I think they cover. Iowa consequently moves on to 4-2, 2-1 in conference play. Washington would move on to 4-3, 2-2 in conference play. They do have a bye week, though, following this game, so they could also sell out here and not worry about a drop-off the following week because they rest the following week. I think it'll be a competitive game. I think it will be fun. It wouldn't shock me at all if, despite winning by 2 scores, Washington actually outgains Iowa in total yardage, just with some field goals forced, probably some field goals missed with it being on the road in a loud environment, and also Iowa being, well, effective with their drives and also forcing some turnovers. I think that Iowa will win this game. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488 and Brasco Rascal and Connor Little OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, Tyler Nye, and Jilton Kush for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being all-conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Check out my merchandise store and Patreon page and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Have a great day. Go Huskies. Go Hawkeyes.